All right, today on the podcast, I'm joined by Louis Amestoy. He's the editor and publisher at the Kerr County Lead in Texas. And Louis, nice to meet you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Um, I kind of start every podcast the same. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background, your career in local media, kind of set the stage.
Right. So my career started when I was in high school, working for, at the time, was a little 5-day, newspaper in Banning, California. And I was covering high school sports because a buddy of mine volunteered me to do it. And when I went to my first year of college, our track coach at the time, Riverside City College, said, "Oh, Amestoy, you can write. I'm going to sign you up for this journalism class." And sure enough, that was the one class I really paid attention to. I learned how to write AP style. I went back to work for the Daily at the time when I was like 19, and pretty much have been in it ever since. And I went from there to working at a weekly, and then I went to back to a daily. I left for a couple of years and came back to work for a daily. So most of my career was always in the Inland Empire, Southern California, which is in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And I worked for the Hemet News, the San Bernardino County Sun, the Press Enterprise in Riverside. And then I also helped launch a twice weekly paper in Hemet called the Valley Chronicle. And then I was all over the place. But I always had, I had different levels of responsibility at newspapers. So, I was an assistant managing editor, an assistant city editor, an editor. And then in 2012, I went to work at the Bakersfield Californian, and I rose up through there and became a VP there and the editor of the Bakersfield Californian. I was there for about 4 years. Took a publisher job up in Jackson, California. That quickly imploded because the owner sold the paper with me within like a week of me being there. And then I came back, and then I worked in PR for a little bit, kind of in 2017 and 2018 in that period. And I really missed newspapers, so I took a job in Colorado at the Greeley Tribune, which was a lesson in frustration. Got fired from that job, and then ended up in Kerrville, just because I knew I had applied here because I knew that Greeley was a disaster waiting to happen. And I came down here, and I kind of liked the town. I was like, this is a pretty cool place, but I was like, it's just way too small. I came back, and when I got fired, I said, hey, I'm done with this job now, and would you still have me? And they're like, yeah, come on down. So I took the job here, and again, probably too small for my work, but I think I was in it for about a year and a half. We went through COVID, and I just couldn't take one more second of working for a corporate chain newspaper or a publisher who didn't know what they were doing. And I quit, and I launched the Lead, the first version of the Lead, in early 2021. I did it for about 6 to 8 weeks, and I was like, am I going to be able to make this? I was a little nervous about money. So I took a job at the Greenville Herald-Banner as the editor there, which is owned by CNHI. And that was immediately problematic because you get there and you're like, wait a minute, they don't have 7 reporters here. They have like 2 reporters here. And the resources were poor. And I had applied for all these different grants and things to kind of start my own thing. Got turned down everywhere. And then out of the blue one day, Facebook calls me and says, would you be interested in being a part of this pilot program that we're going to launch called Bulletin, which was supposed to be a Substack competitor? And they're like, we'll give you this much money a year to do it. I was like, done, I'm out. So I resigned, and I went back, and I worked for Meta as a contractor for a year or so, and pretty much realized that Meta was a nightmare in a lot of ways. I love the idea of what they could have done with this, like fostering local journalism. I was one of 20 local journalists they hired to do a product like this. And I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. I knew exactly how I was going to build this thing out. And about a year into the program, Meta jettisoned the whole project. And they gave me a buyout, and I was like, woohoo! And I've been independent ever since. So it's been great. It's been a great experience. There's been a lot of ups and downs, but Some days I think I'm broken. Other days I'm just love to be here doing this.
I think that's just how it goes. Like running any kind of business, that's how I feel. Some days I'm in the pits, and some days I'm on top of the world. I hadn't heard of that meta program. I guess only 20 people or something like that. Maybe that's why.
Well, they had a really bad. What it was, they wanted to compete with Substack, and so they were building a newsletter platform that was like Substacks, and they hired all of these influencers to be there. Like they had Malcolm Gladwell, and they had Aaron Andrews, and they had Mitch Albom. Were all part of the stable of writers.
Gotcha.
And none of them did a damn thing. And I was out there, like I produced by myself almost 20% of the total content on their network because I was like, I'm gonna do it every day. I'm gonna take it seriously. I had paid subscribers from the start, so I knew that, and they had some really good people who were like, they had great resources. They supported me tremendously with resources. You had legal resources. You had Dan Oshinsky, who's an email guru, who's brilliant.
Yeah, I know Dan. He's been on the podcast before. He's great.
Yeah, so he's tremendous. Like he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met in this industry. And so you had these resources, but I just knew, I could feel it. They were not like Zuckerberg's whole thing was, I don't want to do journalism, But it's like, we could have done some great things if you would have just had the patience and the buy-in to do it. I mean, it would have been tremendous. And I think the result of it is that journalism has been weakened by Facebook in a lot of ways. So, it's problematic.
Yeah, definitely. That's a recurring theme on here. Well, that's an interesting path. I haven't heard anybody take that exact kind of path to where they're at. Could you talk a little bit about the Kerr County lead as it is now? I know you do a podcast, you do newsletters, I think. Like, what are the formats? How are you monetizing now? Just talk about how it exists today.
Well, let me say this, that I got into digital news. I was forced into it in 2005. And I was working in for Media News Group. And I was literally like the first digital editor in their company's history. And I was an assistant managing editor working in the LA newspaper group and working at a San Bernardino in Ontario, California. And I learned a lot in a hurry, and I remember saying to these guys, like, look, we got to go hard. We got to be present. We got to do things that we're not necessarily comfortable doing. We need to protect our franchises, which is like high school sports and things like that. And nobody ever listened. And so when I started the lead, there's a couple of things that happened that I think are critically important. One, I turned 50 and I just didn't give a shit anymore. I'm sorry if you cut that out, but
no, it's okay. I'll leave it in.
I just didn't care anymore. I was not going to work for any more crazy people. I was going to do what I wanted to do, and based on the experience that I had. So the lead was, one, built out the idea that news organizations should be leaders in the county or the area they represent. And two, the goal was hyper present participation in just about every community events possible. There were some areas where I said, I don't have the ability to do that, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on high-end coverage of growth and development in my community. We're going to do it in a newsletter format every day, Monday through Friday. We'll have a paid deal Monday through Friday. Initially I had a paywall too on my website. So we have a website, we have a newsletter, we have the show. So my thing is that I have to have contact with my audience every single day to be relevant. And we're now in year 5. And so we've somehow weathered some amazing news cycles and events, and we're operating in one of the more conservative counties in Texas, but we're operating in one of the most interesting counties in Texas, in the Texas Hill Country. In 5 years, we'll have 5 years in August. That'll be a big milestone for me personally, and a big milestone, I think, for where we're going to go with the lead. Now, it's just me, and I'm okay with that. I don't have to delegate. I mean, I'm bad at delegating. I'm bad at probably managing people, and this is probably the best of both worlds.
I had a question in here about AI in the newsroom, how you're using it. But I'm curious, since you're a one-man show, just what tools you're using in general to do a daily podcast, I think almost daily newsletters, and like, hyper present doing the reporting, I think is the term you used. Like, what kind of tools are you using for your org? Yeah.
What's interesting is that I did do a little, I had to do a little, at one point I was like worried about insurance because I'm older now, and so was doing some part-time work for a school district here while I was doing this, and they were kind of a little bit out of my coverage area, even though they're in Kerr County. That was not something I was covering all the time. Most of my focus is kind of on the county and the city of Kerrville, county of Kerr and city of Kerrville. And one of the guys there was like, Lewis, how do you do that? Do you AI? I'm like, no, I don't use AI. Are you crazy? I was kind of opposed to it. I'd played around with ChatGPT a little bit, but I think later on I realized that, I used Grammarly from the start, because I'm backstop. I don't have a backstop, it's just me. And honestly, like, my writing's okay. I'm not the best writer in the world. I'm never going to win writing awards, but I knew that I needed a backstop for this to produce the level of content that I wanted to produce. And it wasn't until my girlfriend, partner, Jennifer Dean came along where she was using ChatGPT for some things. And we were on this long drive back to California during the holidays a couple of years ago, or in 2024. And she started talking to me about it. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll test some of this stuff. So I was at a city council meeting one day and I was experimenting with Grammarly, and I was like, wow, I can use my phone to take a picture of this graphic and then highlight the text and then import it in there and give it some commands and it'll rewrite this thing. And I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. And then I kind of found my way to Claude, which early on, Claude was pretty good, but it had a lot of deficiencies. And I tried a bunch of other things, Manus, Perplexity, Gemini. I've used all of them at some point. But the workflow, what happened with the workflow was that it developed into, basically a kind of a three-pronged tool. Claude does the bulk of my writing assistant stuff. And here's how I view AI that I think most people don't always get. If you use it generatively, you're going to have problems. If you use it as a writing assistant with the right prompts and the right guidance, it's awesome. And, like my first experiments with it was like, we cover the one area of sports we cover is college sports here in town. I don't deal with the high schools because it's just too much, but, feed it a box score and boom, there it is. It would make up quotes and stuff. That was problematic, but it's gotten better through that period. And I will say that the addition of NotebookLM from Google has been really powerful. And then if I can't use Claude, I use Gemini. And so we are kind of, because I have the Google Creative Suite, which has a lot of powerful tools in there. NotebookLM is pretty incredible. And what it can do now aren't even perfect, no, but they're giving us opportunities to do some things at scale that we probably couldn't have done previously. I mean, I've always been kind of a hard worker, but I think even now, like it's given us an opportunity to show people what we're capable of doing with just a very, very small staff.
Very cool. Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of Claude. I got, like everybody, I kind of started with ChatGPT, and then I've had friends and people on this show talk about Claude, and I'm a big fan of it. If you can figure out how to prompt it and use it, like you said.
Well, I think now the latest versions of Claude now, I'm in 4.6 Sonnet or whatever it is. Yeah. And it's starting to memorize the prompts that I've given it, so I use it every day. It kind of understands now where I'm at. I heard an AI guy the other day talk about why he's like, I don't really like Claude. And people were looking at me like, oh, Lewis, he just threw down with you. But someone came back and said, why don't you like Claude? And he said exactly what I would have said about ChatGPT. I'm just used to using Claude over ChatGPT because I've basically invested in it now for over a year, and it's gotten only better over the last year, and it understands now what I want it to do. I think the thing that people forget about with AI is, it's kind of like, crap in, crap out. If you give it good prompts and good information, and you give it focus. And this is one of the things that's beautiful about it too, is that it fundamentally understands AP style, which is also pretty awesome. So, I'm a strong adherent to AP style, and man, it can do write-throughs like you wouldn't believe. And I'll give you an illustration of that. So, we had the floods here in July of 2025. Right. It killed 119 people here in Kerr County. And honestly, I was like kind of looking forward to sleeping in on July 4th, because it was the day that we were still going to work that day, but we were not going to necessarily do the show that we normally do, which is from 9 to 10 in the morning. We were going to but I woke up like around 6:45 or so. I look at my phone and there's like all these messages on there, and it was just, an unbelievable day. And here's how I did it. And people have asked me this before, how we were able to manage. Columbia Journalism Review kind of wrote about this a little bit, but we built very early on a NotebookLM, a notebook with all of our sort of sourcing and information. In the audio that we had, we did the show live at the time. And so we were able to record snippets. So I use an internet tool or a video tool called Wirecast, which lets me record and stream at the same time, so I can record segments. So I had people calling into the show while we were streaming, and then we were able to go to press conferences and stream those live. And so on that first day of coverage, we had 9 byline stories. One, because we had the NotebookLM piece working, and then we would take it over to Claude, and Claude was doing write-throughs throughout the day. So we would give it new information. Claude, this is the latest update that we have, and the prompts were like, this is what you need to do, and this is how you're going to do it. And we would get write-throughs throughout the day based off our reporting. So Jennifer would go out, because we were also, one of our cars got stuck in the mud in the first day. So she would go out, and this is insane too. My daughter was here helping out. My ex-wife was helping out, and my ex was getting responses from people that she knew in the community, and she was feeding it to me. My daughter was working with people on the missing persons list. So we were able to say, okay, here is our latest information. Here's a transcript, add this. And so I think we did 9 to 10 bylined web stories. We did 55 updates on Facebook. We had 4 live videos from the press conferences, because I've invested in mobile live video equipment. And even if we didn't do it live, we were able to record it live, and then post it later, because we started running into bandwidth issues at the Kerr County Youth Event Center. And it worked, and it helped us manage an 18-hour day efficiently. So, and the only mistakes that we made, honestly, were human mistakes, so.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm going to have to dig into that a little more. It's a great case study I talked to some people that are super anti using AI for anything, which I think is kind of silly. But I mean, that's amazing that it kind of gave you some superpowers like that in a crazy situation like those floods.
We look at our industry, and I always love the story of the inverted pyramid, why it was done. It was done because it was trying to adhere to technology limitations, when you're trying to move a story across the telegraph, you gotta make it concise. And in our short attention span world, when you tell Claude, hey, here's all my notes, I need you to write this as a story. And I also look at too, Claude makes mistakes, Gemini makes mistakes, they all make mistakes. This is why I sort of was amused that the military was using Claude to kill people with, because sometimes Claude doesn't know what day it is,
yeah.
Is it Monday or Tuesday?
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, what? Yeah. But I think it's like having a reporter, as an editor. And I view Claude as almost like a reporter, saying, okay, here's all the information I need you to look into and find, and go grab it. It's been extremely helpful with, helping us quickly analyze things too, and explain things in a concise manner. which saves me a lot of time to continue to build a more and more robust product. So, all the tools are getting better and better. I think the idea of like, I'm not going to do that because it's AI, like that's ridiculous. Like that's like us saying, I'm not going to do photography because it's not film anymore. Like you had that pushback, initially. It's like, well, it's just going to get better.
Yep.
Is it going to replace human reporting? I don't think so, because I still think it takes us the time to get out there and do stuff. How many of us use our phones exclusively for journalism these days? I can't read my own handwriting anymore, Paul. I gotta have audio of that.
Right. Yeah, I'm an audio guy, obviously. Very cool. Very cool. I've kind of been asking everybody this lately. So you're almost at 5 years in with the Kerr County lead. Flash forward 5 more years. Where do you see the publication then? Optimistically, where do you want to be in 5 years?
Optimistically, I think that, we could be the last. I mean, there's 3 other print newspapers in this market, which is sort of an interesting situation. Either I'm going to merge with them or acquire them or something along those lines, because I feel like they need to be protected in some capacity. But I'm going to be 55 this year. And so my goal, quite frankly, is that, I'm a little bit on one of these guys who's like, I don't necessarily believe in burnout because I love what I do. I can't imagine not doing this work. So I would probably be one of those guys that drops dead, working on a story or something along those lines. So I think that, the goal is to continue. Like this year, we need to grow revenue. And how do I do that? And who do I hire to make those decisions? That's been the biggest challenge, moving forward, is like, we have great content, and when I can sell ads, I can do that too. And so, but the minute that I sell ads is the minute the content suffers, even with AI tools. And I'm still trying to wrestle with that, what that looks like with the business model.
Very cool, man. I think we touched on everything I had in my prep. Where can people find you online? What do you want me to link to?
Yeah,
I'll link to the
KerrCountyLead.com is our website. The Facebook page is the Kerr County Lead website, our Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel with all of our Facebook's, doesn't keep live recordings anymore. So today we hit, what's our number today? As of today, we had our 1,128th webcast. Wow. We've had 165 guests on the show since then, and we've done that many newsletters or more during that period. And I think, but the website is, KerrCountyLead.com is where you can kind of touch everything that we do, strong photo galleries. I don't put, one of the things I think that's interesting that I know we touched upon a bit was that one of the things that I feel strongly about is that readership revenue still matters. So I have a strong base of, readership revenue, which gives me kind of a base to build off of. And I have a strong subscriber database already of people who could potentially convert over to being paid. So I think that work is still ongoing. And I lost my thought here I was going to tell you about, but I think what I've been doing is doable. Maybe not for some of the scale that some of the things that we're doing as well, but I think we've made a difference here, in this market in the last, 4 years. So we've had some big stories, and our independence has sort of helped, do some things that others wouldn't touch. So that's something else profound I wanted to tell you. Now, my head's gone. So
that happens to me every episode.
Somebody gets in there and does stuff.
Yeah, it just fades out real quick. Yep.
Oh, I think, one of the things that I was going to tell you is that the newsletter is probably my most exclusive product. And so when you go to our website, you won't see a lot of the content that's there, that's on the newsletter. So a lot of our reporting is frequently only in the newsletter and not in the website. And I did that because I wanted the newsletter to be exclusive. It was easier to manage that paid audience than it would be to do a paywall, because the paywall was just confusing people and stupid. And so, my only thing that I'm still left with is that in the age of social media dominating how our traffic is run, do I need to have a true website anymore? Or should it be, more newsletter oriented? Because the numbers are still really strong in the newsletter. And it's like print. And in some ways, like people will remember, hey, I read that in your newsletter today.
Yeah, that's interesting. Things are changing fast, and it is like, especially with Google searches going down so much. Do you need the site? If you've got
do you need the site? You need some place to distribute your content to. But, like increasingly Bulletin, the beauty of Bulletin was all kind of combined into one, like Substack or Ghost or things like that. And so I'm constantly wrestling with where to move strategically, in the future. One other thing I was going to tell you about too is one of the things I've been championing too is that this flood coverage was unbelievable. It was an unbelievable story. It was the number one story in the world, for a week. We had a presidential visit. We had multiple visits from the governor of Texas. We had TV crews from all over the world. But, and what was amazing was the response from the world to this community. We had $150 million raised by the Community Foundation of the Texas Hill Country. Most of that was raised in that first week. There was volunteers from all over the world that came out here. Except when it came to journalism, there was no one to help us. No one wanted to help us, and I think I wrote an op-ed for editor and publisher that was on their online version. And I said, aren't we better than that? We're such a competitive beast, but in the reality of something of this deal, isn't it better to get it right than to be first on some of this stuff, and even I run into that problem too. I'm hyper competitive, but nobody came to us. The International Nonprofit News Organization did come with some money and some funding. But that was it. They're the only ones that reached out. Everyone else was like, oh, screw you. You're on your own. And that's problematic, I think, for our future.
Yeah, I know. It's a big part of this podcast is trying to figure that out. Haven't cracked the nut yet. So we'll get there. Awesome. Lewis, thank you so much for taking the time.
No problem.
This was really cool. And yeah, man, you have a great day.
All right, you too. Take care, man.
Yep, thanks.